It was supposed to be just another ordinary day at a high-end restaurant. But when Snoop Dogg walked in undercover, what he experienced left him shocked and furious. Disrespect, mockery, and outright humiliation from his own employees. But what Snoop does next will leave everyone speechless. Watch until the end to see how he turns everything upside down. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know. How would you handle it if you were in Snoop's position? Snoop Dogg sat in his studio, the dim glow of recording equipment surrounding him, as he leaned back in his chair, rolling a cigar between his fingers. It wasn't often he had time to relax these days, juggling his music, business ventures, and public appearances. But tonight, his mind was elsewhere. Over the past few months, an idea had taken root. A personal project, something far removed from his usual ventures. He wanted a restaurant, not just any restaurant, but a place that could feel like home for anyone walking through its doors, a sanctuary of good food and good vibes. The idea first hit him during a conversation with a friend who mentioned a popular upscale eatery that was up for sale. Known for its fine dining and chic ambiance, the place had a sterling reputation, but whispers of changes in ownership had started circulating. It was an opportunity Snoop couldn't ignore. He envisioned a spot where he could kick back after a long day, or host intimate gatherings with friends, all while ensuring that it upheld his ideals of respect and inclusivity. He made the decision quietly, contacting his business manager and lawyers to handle the transaction. Everything was set up to keep his name out of the spotlight. He wanted this venture to remain a secret, at least for now. The restaurant staff had no idea their establishment had changed hands, let alone that their new boss was one of the most iconic figures in the entertainment industry. When the deal closed, Snoop celebrated in his own way. A small toast with close friends and family, far from the public eye. But even as he savored the victory, he knew the real work was just beginning. Owning a restaurant was about more than the paperwork. It was about ensuring that the place truly lived up to his vision. And there was only one way to find out if it would. A week later, Snoop found himself parked outside the restaurant. His car was understated, nothing flashy, just an ordinary black sedan that wouldn't draw attention. He wore a hoodie, jeans, and a baseball cap, pulling the brim low over his face. He wanted to blend in, to see the restaurant as any other customer would. This wasn't about being Snoop Dogg the celebrity. Tonight, he was just a man looking for a good meal. As he stepped out of the car, the crisp evening air greeted him. The restaurant stood before him, its warm lighting spilling onto the sidewalk, exuding elegance. He took a deep breath, adjusted his cap, and walked toward the entrance. Here is the Tate Guide next portion, ringed of the transcript, keeping the length intact and ready for character name updates as they appear. Inside, the atmosphere was exactly what he'd hoped for. The soft clinking of glasses, quiet murmur of conversation, and the mouth-watering aroma of expertly crafted dishes wafting from the kitchen. The space was elegant without being ostentatious, a balance he'd always appreciated. He scanned the room, noting the well-dressed patrons at their tables, some laughing in groups, others enjoying quiet moments alone. He approached the hostess stand, where a young woman glanced up from her clipboard. Her expression was polite but distant, her eyes quickly scanning his casual attire. "Good evening," she said. "Do you have a reservation?" Snoop shook his head. "Nah, just me tonight. Got room for one?" The hostess hesitated, her gaze flickering to a seating chart before returning to him. "Let me check," she said, her tone neutral. She disappeared into the dining area for a moment, then returned with a slight frown. "We have a table near the entrance. Follow me." Snoop nodded and followed her through the restaurant, noting the subtle glances from other diners. Some barely noticed him, while others gave him a quick once-over before returning to their meals. It wasn't unusual. He'd long since grown used to being a subject of curiosity. Still, something about the atmosphere felt different. The hostess led him to a small table near the entrance, away from the larger, more prominent seating areas. She placed a menu on the table without another word and walked away. Snoop sat down, flipping through the menu as he glanced around the room. He wanted to get a feel for the place, to see how the staff interacted with customers. It didn't take long for the first signs of trouble to appear. Minutes ticked by, and no one came to his table. He noticed servers bustling around the other patrons, chatting and laughing as they delivered drinks and appetizers. Yet no one acknowledged him. He raised an eyebrow but remained patient, observing the flow of the dining room. Finally, a waitress approached. Her name tag read, Erica, and her demeanor was far from welcoming. "What can I get you?" she asked. Her tone clipped as if she were doing him a favor by taking his order. Snoop offered a polite smile. "I'll take the house special and a glass of water." Erica scribbled the order on her notepad, barely glancing at him. "Sure," she muttered, turning on her heel without another word. As he waited, Snoop continued to watch the room. The staff seemed friendly enough with the other diners, their interactions warm and engaging. Yet with him, there was a clear difference, a coldness, an unspoken judgment that he could feel with every passing moment. It wasn't outright hostility, but it was unmistakable. When Erica finally returned with his drink, she placed it on the table with a thud and walked away without a word. Snoop took a sip, his mind racing. This wasn't what he'd envisioned for his restaurant, not even close. The main course arrived, and while the presentation was decent, the taste was another story. The food was bland, lacking the attention to detail he'd expected from a place with such a reputation. He took a few bites, then set his fork down, his appetite gone. As he finished his meal, Erica returned with the check, her expression indifferent. "Anything else?" she asked, her tone making it clear she hoped the answer was no. Snoop shook his head. "I'm good," he said, pulling out cash to cover the bill and leaving a generous tip despite the poor service. He stood up, glancing around the room one last time before heading for the door. Outside, he leaned against his car, staring at the restaurant's glowing sign. This wasn't just about a bad meal or rude service. It was about something deeper, something that went against everything he believed in. As he got into the car and drove away, a plan began to form in his mind. He would return, but next time, he wouldn't come as a humble customer. He would return as the owner, and the staff who had dismissed and disrespected him would face the consequences. Here's the next portion of the transcript, keeping the length intact and maintaining character name updates as needed. Snoop Dogg sat in his car, parked just down the street from the restaurant. The night was cool, the distant hum of traffic blending with the soft rustle of leaves. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the steering wheel as he gazed at the glow of the restaurant's entrance. People came and went, laughing, talking, their silhouettes framed by the warm golden light spilling out of the glass doors. To them, it was just another night out. To Snoop, it was something much bigger. This time, he wasn't just here to dine. He was here to see it all. Every glance, every gesture, every smirk. His hoodie was pulled low, and his eyes stayed sharp beneath the brim of his baseball cap. It wasn't about hiding his face. It was about blending in, being just another guy in the crowd. No chains, no flashy clothes, no entourage. Just him. He sat for a moment longer, letting the beat of his own thoughts settle into a rhythm. This wasn't the first time he'd faced disrespect. Life had taught him to keep his cool when people showed their true colors. But this wasn't just about him anymore. This was his restaurant. His name might not be on the front sign, but every dish, every plate, every customer's experience belonged to him now. That meant something. And if people were being treated unfairly in his house, then something had to change. Finally, he stepped out of the car, hoodie still up, hands in his pockets, and walked with an unhurried stride toward the entrance. He pushed open the glass door and was greeted by the familiar blend of scents: garlic, rosemary, sizzling steak, fresh bread. A smile tugged at the corner of his lips. This was the feeling he'd wanted his restaurant to give people: warmth, comfort, satisfaction. But that feeling vanished the moment he stepped inside. He caught the shift immediately. The soft buzz of conversation continued, but something was different. The eyes, the looks. It wasn't just one or two glances. It was a wave. People turned their heads just slightly, some whispering, others offering those quick, darting looks people give when they're trying not to be obvious. It was subtle, but he'd seen it too many times before. People assuming, people judging. The hostess was at her podium tapping on a tablet. She didn't notice him at first. He stepped forward, waiting, giving her time to see him. It took longer than it should have. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth but firm. She glanced up, and her eyes did that thing. That quick flicker from his shoes to his face, the way people measure someone's worth in an instant. She blinked, tilting her head slightly. "Can I help you?" "Yeah," he said. "Looking for a table. Just me tonight." Her eyes shifted toward the dining area, scanning for open seats. There were plenty. She could have seated him immediately, but instead, she hesitated. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked. "Nope," he replied, keeping his tone neutral. She pressed her lips together and checked her tablet again. A long pause. Too long. He watched her eyes scan over the empty tables as if she were looking for an excuse. "We're pretty full tonight," she said, not meeting his gaze. "Looks like you got plenty of room," he replied, nodding toward the dining area. Her eyes darted in the direction he pointed, then back to him. She gave him a tight, practiced smile, the kind you see on people who've already decided they're not going to help you. "Those tables are for reservations only." Snoop raised an eyebrow, his patience thinning. "Word? I just saw 2 people walk in without one." The hostess's face twitched. She shifted on her feet, tapped on her tablet again like she was looking for something to say. "Look, I'll see what I can do. Just wait here," she muttered before walking off toward the back of the restaurant. He stood there, hands still in his pockets, glancing around. More eyes on him. Whispered words exchanged. He could feel it. They didn't know him. Not as him. To them, he was just another black man in a hoodie standing at the front of a place he supposedly didn't belong. Minutes passed. More minutes. His patience thinned. Eventually, the hostess returned, avoiding his eyes. "We've got a small table near the entrance," she said like it was the best she could do. "Follow me." He followed her to a cramped 2-seat table by the front window, close to the door where the cold draft blew in every time someone entered. This wasn't just coincidence. It was placement, the kind of table you give someone you don't want staying long. But he sat anyway. Calm, collected, watching everything. Snoop's server arrived. Her name tag read, Melissa, and her demeanor was far from welcoming. "What can I get you?" she asked, her tone clipped, as if she were doing him a favor by taking his order. Snoop offered a polite smile. "I'll take the house special and a glass of water." Melissa scribbled the order on her notepad, barely glancing at him. "Sure," she muttered, turning on her heel without another word. As he waited, Snoop continued to watch the room. The staff seemed friendly enough with the other diners. Their interactions were warm and engaging. Yet with him, there was a clear difference, a coldness, an unspoken judgment that he could feel with every passing moment. It wasn't outright hostility, but it was unmistakable. When Melissa finally returned with his drink, she placed it on the table with a thud and walked away without a word. Snoop took a sip, his mind racing. This wasn't what he'd envisioned for his restaurant, not even close. The main course arrived. While the presentation was decent, the taste was another story. The food was bland, lacking the attention to detail he'd expected from a place with such a reputation. He took a few bites, then set his fork down, his appetite gone. As he finished his meal, Melissa returned with the check, her expression indifferent. "Anything else?" she asked, her tone making it clear she hoped the answer was no. Snoop shook his head. "I'm good," he said, pulling out cash to cover the bill and leaving a generous tip, despite the poor service. He stood up, glancing around the room one last time before heading for the door. Outside, he leaned against his car, staring at the restaurant's glowing sign. This wasn't just about a bad meal or rude service. It was about something deeper, something that went against everything he believed in. As he got into the car and drove away, a plan began to form in his mind. He would return, but next time, he wouldn't come as a humble customer. He would return as the owner, and the staff who had dismissed and disrespected him would face the consequences. Snoop Dogg sat in his car, parked just down the street from the restaurant. The night was cool, the distant hum of traffic blending with the soft rustle of leaves. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the steering wheel as he gazed at the glow of the restaurant's entrance. People came and went, laughing, talking, their silhouettes framed by the warm golden light spilling out of the glass doors. To them, it was just another night out. To Snoop, it was something much bigger. This time, he wasn't just here to dine, he was here to see it all. Every glance, every gesture, every smirk. His hoodie was pulled low, his eyes stayed sharp beneath the brim of his baseball cap. It wasn't about hiding his face, it was about blending in, being just another guy in the crowd. No chains, no flashy clothes, no entourage, just him. He sat for a moment longer, letting the beat of his own thoughts settle into a rhythm. This wasn't the first time he'd faced disrespect. Life had taught him to keep his cool when people showed their true colors. But this wasn't just about him anymore. This was his restaurant. His name might not be on the front sign, but every dish, every plate, every customer's experience belonged to him now. That meant something. And if people were being treated unfairly in his house, then something had to change. Finally, he stepped out of the car, hoodie still up, hands in his pockets, and walked with an unhurried stride toward the entrance. He pushed open the glass door and was greeted by the familiar blend of scents: garlic, rosemary, sizzling steak, fresh bread. A small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. This was the feeling he'd wanted his restaurant to give people: warmth, comfort, satisfaction. But that feeling vanished the moment he stepped inside. He caught the shift immediately. The soft buzz of conversation continued, but something was different. The eyes, the looks. It wasn't just one or two glances. It was a wave. Patrons turned their heads just slightly, some whispering, others offering those quick, darting looks people give when they're trying not to be obvious. It was subtle, but he'd seen it too many times before. People assuming, people judging. The hostess was at her podium, tapping on a tablet. She didn't notice him at first. He stepped forward, waiting, giving her time to see him. It took longer than it should have. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth but firm. She glanced up and her eyes did that thing, that quick flicker from his shoes to his face, the way people measure someone's worth in an instant. She blinked, tilting her head slightly. "Can I help you?" "Yeah," he said. "Looking for a table. Just me tonight." Her eyes shifted toward the dining area, scanning for open seats. There were plenty. She could have seated him immediately, but instead she hesitated. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked. "Nope," he replied, keeping his tone neutral. She pressed her lips together and checked her tablet again. A long pause. Too long. He watched her eyes scan over the empty tables as if she were looking for an excuse. "We're pretty full tonight," she said, not meeting his gaze. "Looks like you got plenty of room," he replied, nodding toward the dining area. Her eyes darted in the direction he pointed, then back to him. She gave him a tight, practiced smile, the kind you see on people who've already decided they're not going to help you. "Those tables are for reservations only." Snoop raised an eyebrow, his patience thinning. "Word? I just saw 2 people walk in without one." The hostess's face twitched. She shifted on her feet, tapped her tablet again, like she was looking for something to say. "Look, I'll see what I can do. Just wait here," she muttered, before walking off toward the back of the restaurant. He stood there, hands still in his pockets, glancing around. More eyes on him. Whispered words exchanged. He could feel it. They didn't know him. Not as him. To them, he was just another black man in a hoodie, standing at the front of a place he supposedly didn't belong. Minutes passed. More minutes. His patience thinned. Eventually, the hostess returned, avoiding his eyes. "We've got a small table near the entrance," she said, like it was the best she could do. "Follow me." He followed her to a cramped 2-seat table by the front window, close to the door, where the cold draft blew in every time someone entered. This wasn't just coincidence. It was placement. The kind of table you give someone you don't want staying long. But he sat anyway, calm, collected, watching everything. His server arrived, a woman named Rachel, according to her name tag. She didn't seem to recognize him. though her demeanor made it clear she didn't care who he was. Her tone was clipped, her posture stiff. "Water?" she asked flatly, barely glancing at him. "Yeah, water's good," he replied calmly. She nodded, scribbled it down, and walked off before he could say anything else. No smile, no warmth, nothing. He watched her head to the next table and, like magic, her attitude transformed. She was all smiles for the other diners, laughing, joking, full charm mode. It was obvious now, crystal clear. When Rachel returned with his water, she placed it on the table with a thud, like she was slamming a door. Still no words, no enjoy, just a thud, and she was gone. Snoop took a sip, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the room. When Rachel returned to take his order, her tone hadn't improved. "Ready to order?" she asked sharply. "I'll take the house special," he said simply. Another scribble, another walk-off. No, thank you. No acknowledgement, just silence. The food took longer than it should have. Too long. He noticed other tables getting their meals before him, even those who arrived later. When his dish finally arrived, Rachel dropped it on the table with the same careless thud as before. No words, no glance, just thud, gone. He stared at the plate. It was sloppy. The garnish was off-center, the sauce smeared along the edge. He knew how the food was supposed to look. He'd seen the presentation files from the head chef himself. This wasn't it. Not even close. He took one bite. Bland, no seasoning, no care. He didn't even finish it. He just sat back, tapping his fingers on the table, watching Rachel, watching the hostess, watching the way their eyes met across the room as they shared a laugh. He knew that laugh. He'd heard it before. It was the sound of people thinking they'd won. When Rachel came back with the check, she tossed it onto the table without a word. "Whenever you're ready," she muttered, still avoiding his gaze. Snoop paid in cash, leaving a generous tip, not for Rachel, but for himself. It was the kind of move that said, "I see you, I see all of you." On his way out, he stopped by the door and looked back one last time. They didn't notice him staring. Not yet, but they would. Outside, he leaned against his car, letting the cool air hit his face. His eyes turned to the glow of the restaurant sign overhead. It was a beautiful sign, sleek and modern. It was supposed to be a symbol of class, warmth, and elegance, but tonight, it just felt hollow. He pulled out his phone. With one tap, he started recording. His face filled the screen, hoodie up, eyes locked on the camera. "What's up, y'all?" he began, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. "I just walked out of a restaurant. My restaurant. Yeah, you heard me. Mine." He turned the camera, giving his followers a glimpse of the building behind him. This is what happens when they don't know who you are, when they think you don't belong. "You see this place? This my spot. I bought it. I own it. And tonight, I came in to see how they treat regular people. What I saw," he paused, his eyes narrowing, "was straight-up disrespect. Cold looks, rude service. Food so bad I wouldn't feed it to my dog." He looked directly into the camera. "You know me. You know I don't let stuff like this slide. Stay tuned. This story ain't over." He hit post. By the time he reached his car, his phone was buzzing. Comments, reposts, fire emojis. The floodgates had opened. Tomorrow, the world would know. The sun hadn't even risen yet, but Snoop Dogg's phone was already lighting up like a Christmas tree. Notifications rolled in like an unstoppable flood. Likes, comments, reposts, direct messages. His video had gone viral overnight. As he sat at the kitchen counter in his home, his phone buzzed continuously, lighting up every few seconds with new alerts. He sipped his morning coffee, scrolling through the endless stream of reactions. "Can't believe they disrespected Snoop like that," one comment read, followed by fire emojis and angry faces. "Imagine how they treat people who don't own the place," said another. "Name and shame that spot," demanded one of his followers. Their comment liked thousands of times. Celebrities, influencers, and fans alike joined in the conversation. Fellow artists like Kendrick Lamar and Ice Cube reposted the video with captions like "unacceptable" And this gotta change. News outlets caught wind of the story, and headlines began to pop up across social media and news sites. Snoop Dogg exposes restaurant for disrespect and racism. Viral video reveals shocking treatment of Snoop Dogg in his own restaurant. Snoop Dogg calls out his own staff, and the internet isn't having it. The internet was ruthless. Comment sections were flooded with people tagging the restaurant's social media pages, demanding explanations, and calling for boycotts. People dug up old reviews, searching for any sign that other guests had been mistreated. Within hours, hashtags like Respect Snoopaz and Boycott the Spot were trending on Twitter. Snoop leaned back in his chair, his eyes locked on his phone. The plan had worked. He wasn't usually one for public drama, but sometimes public pressure was the only way to spark real change. If people thought he'd forget about this, they didn't know Snoop. He opened Instagram Live. Within seconds, thousands of people joined, their comments flying in at lightning speed. "Yo, yo, yo," he said with a smirk, leaning into the camera. "I see y'all wildin' out here. I see the love. I see the energy. I see it all. And you're right. What happened last night? Nah, we ain't letting that slide." He tilted the camera to show the morning sunlight spilling through his kitchen windows. "See, I was quiet last night. Real quiet. But today? Nah. Today we loud. Y'all already know I'm about respect. I built that place to be about respect. Everybody eats. Everybody's welcome. But apparently some folks didn't get the message." The comments exploded. "Facts. Name names, Unc." "Shut it down, Snoop." Snoop chuckled. "Oh, we gonna name names, don't worry. But I want y'all to understand something. This ain't just about me. Yeah, they disrespected Snoop Dogg. But you know what that tells me? They've been doing this to everybody. Ain't no way I'm the first person to feel that vibe." His face grew more serious. "So here's the plan. I'm heading back today. This time, they gonna see me for real. Not in a hoodie. Not as some random dude walking in off the street. Nah. Today they see the owner. And trust me, everybody who disrespected me is gonna feel it." He leaned in closer to the camera, his eyes sharp with intensity. "Stay tuned." The live ended, and within minutes, clips of his message were everywhere. The media picked it up, spinning it into an even bigger story. News anchors dissected his words. Snoop Dogg takes control of his restaurant after viral incident, one anchor announced on a major network. Every major blog reposted his live video. Memes flooded social media with captions like, "They disrespected the wrong one," and "When you don't know the boss is in the building." The world was watching now. Meanwhile, inside the restaurant, it was anything but calm. Jessica, the waitress from the previous night, stood at the server station scrolling through her phone. Her face was pale as she read comment after comment. Her name was everywhere. People had identified her from the video and were flooding her social media accounts with messages. "Apologize to Snoop." "Shame on you, Jessica. Hope you like unemployment." Her heart pounded in her chest as she tapped through the messages. Some were more threatening than critical, making her hands tremble. Her co-workers weren't faring much better. Every waiter, chef, and bartender who had been seen laughing or ignoring Snoop in the background was being called out online. One cook, named Tyler, scrolled through his phone with wide eyes. "Man, I didn't even say nothing," he muttered to himself, shaking his head. "And they tagging me like I'm the one that brought the rat." Another waiter, Carlos, leaned against the wall, rubbing his face in frustration. "They got the whole world calling us racist, bro. This is crazy," he said to the bartender, who nodded in agreement. "You think he's really coming back?" the bartender asked, glancing nervously at the front door. Carlos sighed, his arms crossed. "He said it on live, didn't he? Man, if I were y'all, I'd be calling in sick today." Jessica shook her head furiously. "He's bluffing. Celebrities always say they're coming, but they ain't about to pull up in person." She tossed her phone onto the counter, trying to sound confident, but the tremor in her voice gave her away. "You sure about that?" Tyler asked, raising an eyebrow. "'Cause I saw that look on his face when he left last night. That wasn't see you later energy. That was I'm coming back for blood energy." Jessica bit her lip, anxiety creeping up her spine. The manager, a man named Victor, walked in at that moment, his face flushed with stress. "All right, everybody, listen up," he barked. "I know you've seen the videos. I know you've seen the comments. We are not talking to the press. If anyone calls, you tell them, no comment. Understood?" Everyone nodded in silence, the air thick with tension. "Corporate is on my back about this," Victor continued, loosening his tie. "If Snoop Dogg walks through that door, you smile, you apologize. I don't care if you gotta get on your knees. You make it right. We are not losing this restaurant because y'all don't know how to act." Jessica shifted uncomfortably. She opened her mouth as if she was about to say something, then closed it again. She'd never seen Victor this serious. "Got it?" Victor barked. "I want professionalism from every single one of you." The staff nodded, but the mood was grim. Outside the restaurant, news vans began pulling up. Reporters with microphones and cameras lined the sidewalk, hoping to catch a glimpse of Snoop Dogg when he arrived. People walking by stopped to take photos and livestream the growing spectacle. Word had spread that Snoop might show up today, and nobody wanted to miss it. The reporters spoke into their cameras, their voices clear and urgent. "We're live at the scene where music icon Snoop Dogg is expected to arrive any moment now. Tensions are high as customers and staff prepare for what could be a major confrontation between the rapper and his employees," one reporter said. "Fans are calling for mass firings, and many are expecting Snoop Dogg to take direct action. Will he shut the place down? Will he fire the staff? We'll have updates as the story develops," another added. Jessica watched it all from the window, her heart racing. This was supposed to be just another shift, just another night at work. Now, her face was all over the internet. Reporters were outside. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. People she barely knew were texting her saying, "You're on TMZ, girl." She wanted to disappear. She wanted to believe it would blow over, but deep down, she knew it wouldn't. Across town, Snoop Dogg placed his phone on the charger, pulled on a fresh tracksuit, and glanced at himself in the mirror. No hoodie today, no disguise. This time, they'd see him coming. He picked up his car keys and smiled to himself. Showtime. The sun hung high in the sky, its golden glow reflecting off the glass windows of the restaurant. But the warmth of the day did nothing to thaw the icy tension building inside. The staff had been on edge since they clocked in. Every glance toward the front door felt heavier than the last. Jessica paced near the server station, her phone in hand, scrolling through comment after comment on social media. Her face was pale, her fingers shaky. Every notification felt like a ticking time bomb. "He's not coming," she muttered under her breath, though her eyes told a different story. Her nerves were shot. She'd barely slept after being tagged in thousands of hate comments. Celebrities always say they're coming but never show up. It's all for clout. Carlos leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Yeah, tell that to the 3 news vans outside," he shot back, nodding toward the window. Jessica glanced outside and saw the swarm of reporters standing across the street, cameras rolling, mics raised, ready to catch the moment Snoop Dogg walked through the door. She could see the headlines already. Snoop Dogg confronts restaurant staff after viral disrespect incident. Her stomach twisted. Tyler, one of the cooks, walked past, adjusting his apron. "Y'all better get ready for cameras in your face if Snoop walks in here. Ain't no hiding from it. Everybody's gonna see it." He chuckled to himself, shaking his head like it was all one big joke. But it wasn't a joke. Not anymore. The restaurant manager, Victor, stepped in with his phone pressed to his ear. His tie was already loose around his neck, and his face was slick with sweat. The frustration was plain on his face. "No, I don't know if he's coming, but I can't have cameras in my face when he does. I told corporate we're handling it, but they keep blowing up my phone," he barked, rubbing his temple with his free hand. His eyes darted toward the entrance every few seconds, like he expected the door to burst open. Yeah, I get it. Damage control, I'm on it." He hung up and let out a heavy sigh, glancing at Jessica. "You..." He pointed at her. "When he comes, if he comes, keep your mouth shut, smile, apologize. Do not say anything stupid." Jessica swallowed hard and nodded, her eyes locked on the floor. Don't just nod, Jess, Victor snapped, his patience thin. I mean it. No smart remarks, no attitude. If he walks in here and you do anything to make it worse, you're done. You hear me? Yeah. Jessica muttered, still not looking up. The door chime rang. Everyone froze, heads turned in unison toward the entrance. But it wasn't him, just an elderly couple walking in, smiling and chatting like nothing was wrong. A wave of relief washed through the staff, but it didn't last. The clock kept ticking. They knew it was only a matter of time. Minutes passed. More customers arrived. Waiters moved between tables, carrying trays, taking orders, and pouring drinks. But their movements were stiff, their smiles forced. Even the diners felt it. The tension in the air was palpable. Customers glanced toward the door as if they too were waiting for something to happen. Then it happened. A sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb right in front of the restaurant. The engine cut off, and for a moment, everything was still. No one got out right away. Carlos, peering through the front window, cursed under his breath. He's here, he muttered, eyes wide. Oh, he's here. Jessica's heart stopped. Her eyes flicked to the door, her breath shallow. Nah, that's not him, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But the moment the driver's side door opened and a familiar figure stepped out, she knew. She knew it in her bones. It wasn't the hoodie-wearing low-key Snoop from the other night. No, this was Snoop Dogg. Fresh tracksuit, gold chain shining bright in the sun, shades low on his nose, his eyes sharp and focused. This was the man they all knew from music videos and award shows. And now, he was walking straight toward them. Reporters rushed in like a stampede, shouting questions, cameras flashing. Snoop, are you shutting down the restaurant? Is it true you're firing the whole staff? Do you have a message for your fans? He didn't answer any of them. He didn't have to. His face said it all. He was locked in, no distractions, no games. His stride was slow, deliberate, powerful. People on the sidewalk moved aside as if they could feel the weight of his presence. Inside, Victor's heart pounded in his chest. All right, everybody, stay cool, he barked. Stay cool. The front door swung open. The bell chimed. The restaurant fell into complete silence. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks hovered over plates. All eyes turned to the entrance. Snoop stepped in, his hands in his pockets, his gaze cutting through the room like a blade. No hoodie this time. No disguise. No hiding. His eyes scanned the crowd slowly, taking in every face, every reaction. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. Her feet felt like they were stuck in cement. Her palms were sweaty, her heart racing. She glanced at Victor, silently pleading for guidance, but he didn't move. Nobody did. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning. Snoop's eyes landed on Jessica. She felt it before she even saw it. His gaze locked on her, and it was heavier than all the comments on social media combined. Her legs wobbled, and for a second she thought she might faint. She tried to look away, but her body wouldn't listen. He walked slowly toward the center of the restaurant, his steps perfectly measured. Every footstep echoed louder than it should have. When he reached the middle of the room, he stopped. Dead center. The pause was deliberate, controlled, the kind of pause that demanded attention. He took off his sunglasses slowly, hooking them onto his collar. His now visible eyes scanned the room once more, calm, sharp, unyielding. I'm sure you all know who I am by now, he said, his voice smooth but firm, filling every inch of the room. Not loud, but powerful. And I'm sure you all know why I'm here. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. He nodded slowly, looking at each staff member one by one, letting them feel the weight of his words. The other night, I came here just like anybody else. No cameras, no spotlight, no entourage. Just me. His eyes landed on Jessica. She flinched. I watched. I listened. I saw it all. He continued, his voice like rolling thunder. And what I saw, he tilted his head slightly, letting his words hang in the air, was straight-up disrespect. Jessica's knees nearly buckled. Her breathing became shallow, her chest tight with panic. Snoop pointed toward her, slow and deliberate. "You, step forward." Her eyes darted toward Victor, silently begging for help, but he didn't move. Nobody did. She stepped forward, her legs stiff, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Look at me," Snoop said slowly. She lifted her eyes to meet his. Her lip quivered. Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her apron. "You know what you did," Snoop said quietly, but every word hit harder than a shout. "You know how you made me feel, but you didn't just disrespect me." He gestured to the other patrons in the restaurant. "You disrespected everybody in this place." Jessica's breath came out in short, shallow bursts. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away, too scared to cry. "Now tell me," Snoop said, his eyes locked on hers. "Why should I let you stay?" She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her lips trembled, and she shook her head like a child caught stealing. "That's what I thought," Snoop said, his voice cold and final. He glanced toward Victor. "She's done. Pack her up." Victor nodded immediately. "Yes, sir." "Everybody else," Snoop said, his gaze sweeping across the staff. "Take notes. This ain't just about me. It's about everybody who walks through these doors. I built this place to be a spot for everybody. And if you ain't down with that, then you can walk too." Jessica covered her face with her hands as the first tears fell. Cameras outside flashed endlessly. Reporters shouted questions from the window. Snoop put his sunglasses back on, his face like stone. "Y'all know what it is," he said, walking toward the door. "This ain't over." Just like that, he was gone. The restaurant was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that comes just before a storm, when every second feels heavier than the last. The door had barely finished swinging shut behind Snoop Dogg, but his presence lingered like an echo in every corner of the room. The staff stood frozen, like statues, their eyes darting from one person to another. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody knew what to do. Jessica was gone, taken away in front of everyone. And if Snoop's words meant anything, she wouldn't be the last. Victor stood in the middle of the dining room, loosening his tie like it was choking him. He wiped the sweat off his forehead with a napkin, muttering to himself. "This is bad. This is real bad," he said, pacing near the server station, his eyes darting around like he was searching for a lifeline. But there wasn't one. "Corporate's going to kill me for this." Carlos glanced toward the kitchen, then back at Victor. "What you think corporate's going to do?" "They saw what we saw. Half of it's all over the internet," he said, shaking his head, his jaw tight. "Man, I told y'all. Y'all was doing too much. Now look." Tyler, one of the cooks, leaned against the kitchen doorway. His face was tense, but his voice was calm. "You told them, not me. I ain't say nothing to that man. Y'all was laughing. Y'all was talking. Y'all was being bold. And now look, cameras everywhere. Reporters everywhere. Y'all wanted to be funny. Now it's funny, huh?" He folded his arms, letting his eyes slowly move across the room, landing on Carlos and then on Victor. "Ain't so funny now." Victor spun toward Tyler, pointing a finger like he'd just been accused of something. "Don't start with me, Tyler. You're just as much a part of this as anybody else." "Me?" Tyler's eyebrows shot up. "You better check yourself, boss man. I stayed in that kitchen, made my orders, and kept it pushing. I didn't laugh. I didn't snicker. I didn't throw no shade. So don't point no fingers at me unless you're ready to point one at yourself." The air was thick with tension, like something was about to snap. Nobody spoke, but everyone was thinking the same thing. Who's next? It didn't take long to find out. The front door swung open again. This time, no bell rang, no casual chime, just the sharp sound of wood against metal as the door hit the stopper. 3 men walked in. No, not men. Security. Black suits, earpieces, broad shoulders. They moved with purpose, slow and deliberate, like lions walking into a den of hyenas. Behind them, a man in a gray suit followed. He didn't need to say who he was. Everyone knew. Corporate had arrived. The man in the suit adjusted his cufflinks, his eyes scanning the room with the same cold calculation Snoop had shown earlier. He didn't have to raise his voice. Everyone already knew he was in charge. He walked to the center of the room, his gaze shifting from one employee to the next, like he was taking attendance. "Listen up," he said, his voice smooth but sharp. "I'm Daniel Cross, Regional Director." He let that title hang in the air for a moment, like it had weight. "I think you all know why I'm here." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Daniel's eyes stopped on Victor. "Manager, step forward." Victor swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing up and down like he'd just swallowed an ice cube. He stepped forward slowly, trying to look calm, but his eyes were wild with panic. Yes, sir," he said, his voice cracking slightly. I've been managing the situation, keeping everything under control." "Stop," Daniel said, holding up one hand. His voice was like a blade, slicing through Victor's excuses. "If you were managing the situation, we wouldn't be here." He glanced at one of the security guards, who pulled out a sleek black tablet and tapped on the screen. "You know what this is?" Daniel asked, tilting his head slightly. Victor blinked, his eyes darting between the tablet and Daniel. I don't... "This is footage," Daniel said, tapping the screen once. "Footage from the security cameras in this restaurant. Footage from last night. Footage from this morning." His eyes were locked on Victor now, sharp as broken glass. "Want to see yourself in it?" Victor's face went pale. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Daniel waved one hand, and the security guard pressed a button. The tablet screen lit up. There it was, clear as day. Victor standing in the server station, laughing with Jessica. He wasn't doing anything to stop it. He wasn't saying a word to correct it. He was in it. "See? This is the problem," Daniel said, his eyes still on Victor. "It's not just the staff. It's the leadership. And when leadership is rotten, everything under it rots too." "Sir, I can explain," Victor said, his voice cracking even more now. I was just... "No," Daniel cut him off, his tone firm and final. "You were just gone. Effective immediately." He pointed to the door. "Turn in your keys and get out." Victor's mouth fell open, but no words came out. He looked around the room, hoping to find someone on his side. But there was nobody. No Carlos, no Tyler, no one. He reached for his keychain, his hand shaking as he unhooked it from his belt and handed it to the nearest security guard. "Can I at least..." "No," Daniel said, cutting him off again. "You can leave." Victor turned toward the door, walking slowly, like every step hurt. The other employees watched him in silence, not a single word of support offered. The moment the door closed behind him, Daniel clapped his hands once, the sound echoing off the walls. "All right," he said, his eyes sweeping the room once more. "Here's how this is going to go." Daniel folded his arms, his suit jacket stretching across his shoulders, his gaze sharp and unyielding. "If you were laughing, you're out. If you were watching and saying nothing, you're out. If you think Snoop Dogg's name means less than the other customers that walk through this door, you're out." Silence. Nobody dared move. Nobody even dared to breathe loudly. "You've got two choices right now," Daniel continued, his eyes narrowing. "You can walk out on your own, or I can make that decision for you. But one way or another, this place is getting cleaned up today." Carlos glanced at Tyler, then at the other servers. His jaw tightened. "Man, I ain't do nothing wrong," he muttered, mostly to himself. Daniel heard it. His sharp eyes snapped toward Carlos. "Good," Daniel said, his voice steady but cold. "Then you won't have a problem staying." He shifted his gaze to the others. "But for those of you who did do something wrong, go ahead and clock out now. At first, nobody moved. The room was as still as a photograph. Then, one server pulled off their apron, tossed it onto a table, and walked out without a word. Another followed, then another. Within 5 minutes, 6 staff members had left, their faces pale with shame or stubborn with defiance. Daniel nodded slowly, watching them go. "Good," he said, his tone sharp. "Saves me the paperwork." He turned back to the remaining staff, his eyes sweeping over them like a judge surveying a courtroom. "For those of you still here, understand this. We're not just running a restaurant. We're running Snoop Dogg's restaurant. That name means something. People expect better. I expect better. If you stay, you're signing up for that standard. If you don't, there's the door." The weight of his words sank in like an anchor dropping to the ocean floor. The staff exchanged nervous glances but didn't speak. Daniel gestured toward the security guards. "Training starts tomorrow," he said, his tone leaving no room for debate. "New rules, new policies, zero tolerance." He paused at the entrance, glancing over his shoulder one last time. "If I see anyone on social media bragging, laughing, or talking sideways about what went down here, I promise you, it'll be your last day in this business." With that, he left. The door swung shut, and this time, nobody breathed a sigh of relief. They knew this wasn't over. It was only the beginning. Tyler glanced at Carlos, tilting his head toward the door. "Still think it's a joke?" he asked, his voice low but pointed. Carlos didn't answer. He just walked toward the kitchen, his head down, his hands shoved into his pockets. But Tyler didn't miss the look on his face. That look of someone who just realized the game they were playing was over. The atmosphere inside the restaurant had shifted. It wasn't tense, and it wasn't quiet. It was still. The kind of stillness that follows a storm. Tables sat neatly arranged, chairs pushed in perfectly, and silverware lined up like it was being judged for a magazine spread. But it wasn't the furniture that had changed. It was the people. The staff moved with quiet precision, their eyes locked on their tasks like their lives depended on it. Nobody was talking. Nobody was laughing. The air, once filled with small talk and subtle gossip, had been replaced by the crisp sound of plates clinking softly and the faint hiss of the kitchen stove. Every step was measured, every action deliberate. The silence was deafening. Carlos wiped down a nearby table, his jaw tight. His eyes darted around the room every few seconds, watching his co-workers with suspicion. His movements were fast, almost frantic. Nobody said it, but he could feel what they were all thinking. Am I next? Behind the kitchen counter, Tyler was quiet. Too quiet. Normally, he cracked jokes and flipped orders with flair. But today, he moved like a machine. Every motion was smooth, efficient, and deliberate. No mistakes, no shortcuts. His usual cocky attitude had vanished, replaced by something colder, sharper. He wasn't trying to be seen. He was waiting. "Keep wiping, Carlos," Tyler muttered, just loud enough to be heard. "Ain't nobody trying to hear you breathe heavy like you're running a marathon." Carlos shot him a glare but didn't respond. Not today. Not after what happened to Jessica and Victor. His pride wasn't worth it. Not today. The kitchen door swung open, and in walked Daniel Cross, flanked by 2 security guards. The man didn't need to say a word. His presence was enough to set the whole room on edge. Every server, cook, and busser went stiff, their eyes lowering to the ground. Daniel's leather dress shoes clicked against the floor with each step, sharp and steady. He walked to the center of the dining room, slowly turning in place, taking it all in. The silence was heavy, the weight of it pressing down on everyone like gravity had suddenly doubled. "Better," Daniel said, his voice smooth as glass. "Much better." He slowly turned toward the staff. "I see some of you are still here," he said, his eyes scanning the room like a scanner checking for faults. "That's a good sign. Means you're serious. Means you understand what's at stake." He paused, his eyes locking onto Carlos for a moment, then moving to Tyler, then sweeping over the newer servers like Emily and Rachel. "New rules are in effect as of right now," Daniel said, his tone sharp. No more "it's just a job" energy. This ain't a job, this is a business. This is Snoop Dogg's business. Every eye is on us. You think I'm exaggerating? Look outside. Carlos glanced toward the window. The reporters were still out there. Cameras, microphones, people standing with their phones raised, recording. They hadn't left. If anything, more of them had shown up. Crowds gathered at the edge of the street, just waiting for something to happen. Carlos's stomach churned. Every move he made, every breath, every mistake was now public property. From this point forward, Daniel continued, everything you do reflects on this brand. You burn food, that's on the brand. You roll your eyes at a customer, that's on the brand. You so much as breathe sideways at somebody in here, and it will be on you. Not later. Not after a talk. Not after a warning. Right then. He raised a hand and snapped his fingers. Gone. The room stayed silent. No one dared to nod. No one dared to breathe too loud. Y'all understand that? Daniel's voice cracked like a whip. Yes, sir, they said in near unison, their voices low and shaky. Say it again, Daniel said, his eyes narrowing. Louder. Yes, sir. This time it was firm, like soldiers responding to a drill sergeant. Daniel nodded slowly. Good. I like that. I like that energy. He stepped forward, his eyes moving from face to face. I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to make sure you win. Some of you will get it. Some of you won't. And for those that don't? He glanced toward the front door. You know where the door is. Silence followed. Heavy, cold, final. Then, like an aftershock, Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it, his eyes narrowing. A small grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. He's here, he said softly, putting the phone back in his pocket. The room shifted. Heads turned. Even Tyler leaned forward, his eyes sharp with curiosity. Who's here? Emily asked, her voice quiet but filled with nervous energy. Daniel didn't answer. He just turned toward the front entrance, his hands clasped behind his back. A shadow moved across the glass door. Then the door swung open. Snoop Dogg walked in. Snoop Dogg stepped into the restaurant. No hoodie, no disguise. Today he was sharp, dressed in a black-on-black suit with a crisp white button-up shirt underneath. A gold chain rested perfectly against his chest. Shades perched on his nose, his chin raised slightly, and his walk slow and deliberate, exuding authority with every step. Reporters outside yelled his name. Cameras flashed endlessly, like fireworks going off behind him. But he didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew they were watching. Inside, the staff froze. The atmosphere, already tense, thickened with an unspoken gravity. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Forks hovered over plates, and every single pair of eyes locked onto him. It wasn't just his presence. It was the weight of who he was and why he was there. Carlos's heart pounded in his chest. He turned back to his table, furiously wiping it down, even though it was already spotless. Emily, at the counter, folded napkins with laser focus, her hands trembling slightly. Tyler, usually so cocky, now stood rigid by the kitchen, flipping pancakes with mechanical precision. Snoop stepped into the center of the dining room, his steps steady and measured. He scanned the room like a lion surveying its pride, his eyes sweeping over each employee, pausing just long enough to let them feel his gaze. "Good morning," he said, his voice smooth but sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. "Good morning, sir," the staff echoed, their voices trembling but in unison. He raised an eyebrow, his lips twitching into a slight smirk. "Better," he said. His words carried a weight that made Carlos stand up straighter without even realizing it. Much better. Right behind Snoop, Daniel Cross entered the restaurant, his gray suit as crisp as ever. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. He stood by Snoop's side, his hands clasped behind his back, nodding faintly, as if to emphasize. "You see this? You see how serious we are?" Snoop moved toward the counter. Emily was the closest. Her heart pounded as he stopped in front of her, She glanced up, her wide eyes meeting his. "What's your name?" Snoop asked, tilting his head slightly. "Emily?" she replied, her voice shaking but steady enough. "Emily, sir." He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering just long enough to make her feel the weight of his attention. "You do good work, Emily?" he asked. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I do." Snoop's eyes stayed on her for another second before he nodded, slow and deliberate. "I believe you," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "Need keep doing it." "Thank you, sir," Emily said, her face flushing with a mix of relief and pride. Snoop moved next to Carlos. Carlos felt his chest tighten, but he kept his face neutral. "Don't flinch," he told himself. "Don't flinch." Snoop stepped closer, his eyes locking onto Carlos like a spotlight. "You still focused, Carlos?" he asked, his tone sharp. Carlos nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. Always." Snoop leaned in slightly, his voice lowering but gaining intensity. "See, you were looking nervous last time I was here. Now I'm back and you look sharp. Keep it that way." He patted Carlos on the shoulder, firm, not rough, a gesture that carried more weight than words. "Yes, sir," Carlos said, his voice strong, though his heart pounded like a drum. Finally, Snoop's gaze landed on Tyler, but Tyler didn't wait for a question. "I'm ready," Tyler said, his voice clear and steady, his chin raised slightly. "Been ready, boss." For the first time, Snoop's expression cracked into a small, knowing smirk. "That's what I like to hear," he said, tapping his knuckles twice on the countertop. "You keep that same energy, Tyler. I see you." "Yes, sir," Tyler replied, his face calm, but his chest swelling with pride. Snoop turned to face the entire restaurant. His eyes swept across the room, the staff, the empty tables, the spotless counters. He nodded once, hands in his pockets, his gaze calm but sharp. "Y'all passed the first test," he said, his voice carrying a weight that felt like thunder rolling in the distance. "But this ain't about one shift. It's about every shift, every customer, every order. Ain't no more bad days. No more slip-ups." His gaze caught each staff member in turn, pausing on them just long enough to make his point clear. "The world is watching us now," he continued, his voice deliberate. "Cameras outside. Phones in people's hands. The whole world got eyes on this spot." The silence that followed was louder than any words. His presence filled the room completely, leaving no space for doubt. "But here's the thing," Snoop said, his voice softening slightly, though it remained just as powerful. "When people see this place now, I don't want them thinking about what it used to be. I want them thinking, that's Snoop's spot. That's a place where you get respect. You feel me?" "Yes, sir," the staff said together, their voices stronger this time. Snoop nodded slowly, satisfied. He glanced at Daniel. "Start the training." Daniel stepped forward, pulling a tablet from his jacket pocket. "Starts today," Daniel said, his voice cold but focused. "No excuses. Everyone here's got 2 weeks to complete it. Respect training. Conflict de-escalation. Customer service. You miss one day, you're out. You miss one assignment, you're out." He glanced at each of them, his gaze sharp. No warnings, no second chances. The staff nodded, their faces serious, their eyes locked in. Snoop turned back to the room, his gaze landing on each of them one last time, slowly, intentionally. He didn't need to raise his voice. His presence spoke for itself. "Y'all know me," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You know I don't do fake love. I do respect. And if you give it, you get it back." He let his words settle into their bones. "Don't make me come back like this again," Snoop said, his voice carrying a finality that left no room for debate. "Next time, I'm expecting smiles, not excuses." With that, he turned and walked toward the door, his hands in his pockets, his movement smooth and unhurried. The cameras outside went wild, flashes popping like fireworks as he stepped out into the sunlight. "Tell them Snoop sent you," he said with a small grin, just before disappearing into the blinding lights. The restaurant remained frozen in silence after Snoop Dogg left. No one dared to speak or move too quickly, as though any sudden motion might bring him back. The echoes of his words and the intensity of his presence still hung heavy in the air. Tyler was the first to break the silence. He let out a long, low whistle, shaking his head as he leaned back against the kitchen counter. "Y'all feel that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Carlos, who was still gripping his cleaning cloth tightly, nodded slowly. His gaze remained fixed on the door where Snoop had exited. "I feel it," Carlos muttered, his tone a mix of awe and tension. The air in the room was charged, not with fear, but with something deeper. A realization that things were never going to be the same. The shift had officially begun, and everyone knew it. Emily folded her last napkin with trembling hands, placing it neatly on the counter before finally exhaling. She looked at Carlos and Tyler, her voice soft but steady. "Do you think he meant it?" she asked. "About coming back if we mess up?" Carlos shot her a look. "Did you see him? That man don't play." "He meant every word." Tyler nodded, his usual smirk replaced with a serious expression. "Snoop, don't bluff. If he says he's coming back, he's coming back. Y'all better stay sharp." In the back corner, Daniel Cross remained composed, his tablet tucked under one arm, as he surveyed the room. His cold, calculating eyes scanned the remaining staff. He didn't speak, but the weight of his gaze was just as heavy as Snoop's presence. Finally, Daniel clapped his hands once, the sharp sound slicing through the tense silence like a knife. "All right, listen up," he began, his voice smooth and firm. "What you just experienced wasn't a show. It wasn't for the cameras. That was your reality check." The staff turned their attention to him, their expressions a mix of fear and determination. Starting today, this restaurant operates differently. Respect, excellence, and professionalism. Those aren't just words. They're the rules. If you don't understand that, you won't last here. Period. Daniel pulled out a sheet of paper and unfolded it with precise movements. "Here are the training schedules. Everyone will go through the sessions. No exceptions." He handed the schedule to Carlos, who glanced at it before passing it down the line. Emily raised her hand hesitantly. "What happens if someone doesn't pass the training?" Daniel's gaze snapped to her, sharp and unyielding. "They're out," he said bluntly. "No second chances. No excuses." The bluntness of his response sent a chill through the room. Emily nodded quickly, lowering her hand. Daniel continued, his tone unwavering. "This isn't just a restaurant. This is Snoop Dogg's restaurant. His name, his reputation, and his vision are on the line. That means every single one of you is too." Tyler shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. "So what if—" Daniel cut him off with a raised hand. "There are no what-ifs. You either meet the standard or you don't. If you've got doubts, the door is right there." The room fell silent again. No one moved. No one even glanced toward the door. Satisfied, Daniel nodded and adjusted his tie. "Good. Now, get to work. Training starts in an hour. Make the most of the time you've got." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving the staff standing in a mix of stunned silence and determination. They knew the margin for error had disappeared entirely. Carlos looked at Tyler, his expression grim. "Man, this ain't just a job anymore, this is a test." Tyler smirked faintly, but his usual bravado was gone. "Then we better ace it, 'cause I ain't getting booted like Victor or Jessica." Emily nodded in agreement, her face set with resolve. "We've got to step up, all of us. This isn't about us anymore. It's about what this place stands for." The three exchanged a glance, a silent agreement passing between them. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were ready to face it, because failure wasn't an option. The restaurant's transformation was already underway by the time training began. The energy in the room was palpable as the staff gathered in the back dining area, where chairs had been arranged in neat rows. Daniel Cross stood at the front, a large monitor set up behind him displaying the restaurant's new policies. Emily sat near the front, her hands folded neatly in her lap, while Carlos and Tyler took seats a few rows back. The staff that remained was noticeably smaller, but those who stayed were determined to prove themselves. Daniel cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the low murmur of whispers. "All right, let's get started." He clicked a button on his tablet, and the screen behind him lit up with the words, "Respect, excellence, unity." This isn't just about what you do, it's about how you do it. Every single interaction you have in this restaurant is a reflection of our values, and of Snoop Dogg himself. Daniel let his gaze sweep over the room, pausing briefly on each face to ensure they were paying attention. Rule number 1, respect is non-negotiable. It doesn't matter who walks through those doors. Every customer gets treated like they're the most important person in the room. He clicked the tablet again, and the slide changed to show a list of expectations for customer interactions. Tyler leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing as he read the bullet points. Carlos raised his hand hesitantly. What if a customer's, disrespectful? Daniel's eyes locked on Carlos, sharp, but not unkind. "Good question," he said, his tone measured. "That's where conflict de-escalation comes in. You don't meet disrespect with disrespect. You stay calm, professional, and if it escalates beyond your control, you involve management. But under no circumstances do you stoop to their level." Carlos nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Got it." Daniel moved to the next slide, which read, "Service excellence, the Snoop standard." Rule number 2, excellence isn't optional. From the way you plate the food to the way you carry yourself on the floor, every detail matters. Customers should leave here feeling like they've had the best experience of their lives. He glanced toward Emily, who was furiously jotting down notes in her notebook. "Emily," Daniel said, addressing her directly, "you've been here for a while. What do you think sets a great dining experience apart from an average one?" Emily looked up, startled by the question, but quickly composed herself. "I think it's the little things," she said. "Like remembering someone's name, or noticing when they need something before they even have to ask. It's about making people feel seen and valued." Daniel nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Exactly. It's about going above and beyond. Keep that in mind, all of you." The staff murmured in agreement, and Tyler leaned back in his chair, muttering under his breath, "Man, this is serious." Daniel's sharp eyes caught Tyler's movement, and he tilted his head slightly. "Got something to share, Tyler?" Tyler sat up straight, his usual smirk replaced with a sheepish expression. "No, sir. Just taking it all in." Daniel raised an eyebrow, but didn't press further. Instead, he moved on to the final slide. Unity, building a better team. Rule number 3, we're a team. If one of you fails, we all fail. That means watching each other's backs, holding each other accountable, and stepping up when someone needs help. No more cliques, no more gossip, just unity. The room fell silent as the weight of Daniel's words sank in. Even Tyler looked serious now, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. Daniel clicked off the presentation and folded his arms. "This is the standard from now on. If you can't meet it, there's the door. But if you're willing to put in the work, this restaurant will become something we can all be proud of." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room one last time. "Any questions?" Emily hesitated before raising her hand. "When does the training start?" Daniel smirked faintly. "It already has." As the staff filed out of the back dining area, the atmosphere was tense but focused. Emily lingered behind, flipping through her notes one last time before tucking her notebook into her apron pocket. She glanced around the room, her eyes landing on Carlos, who stood near the kitchen entrance, rubbing the back of his neck. "Hey," she said softly, approaching him. "You doing okay?" Carlos looked up, startled, before nodding. "Yeah, just a lot to process, you know?" Emily nodded in agreement. "Yeah, but I think it's a good thing. This place needed a reset." Carlos exhaled slowly, leaning against the wall. "You're right. Just gotta make sure I'm not part of the problem." Before Emily could respond, Tyler stepped out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. He caught sight of them and smirked. "What's this? A pep talk?" he teased, tossing the towel over his shoulder. "Don't worry, Carlos. You're good as long as you don't mess up in front of Snoop." Carlos shot him a glare, but there was no malice behind it. "Thanks for the vote of confidence, Tyler," he said dryly. Tyler shrugged, his smirk widening. "Hey, I'm just saying, dude's watching everything now. One wrong move, and poof, out the door." Emily frowned. "That's not helping, Tyler." Tyler held up his hands defensively. All right. I'll keep it to myself, for now." He turned and headed back into the kitchen, leaving Emily and Carlos alone. Emily shook her head, her frustration evident. "He's got a point, though," Carlos said quietly. "We're all under the microscope now." Emily placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Then let's make sure we're the ones who get it right." Carlos managed a small smile, nodding. "Yeah, you're right. Thanks, Emily." Meanwhile, in the manager's office, Daniel Cross was on a call with corporate. His tone was measured but firm as he updated them on the progress of the restaurant's overhaul. "We've implemented the new policies, and training is already underway," he said, pacing the room. "Yes, the staff is responding well. No, there haven't been any additional incidents." He paused, listening to the voice on the other end of the line. His expression hardened slightly. "I understand the concern, but let me be clear. We're not just cleaning up the mess. We're setting a new standard. This restaurant will be the gold standard for every location in the chain." Another pause, then a faint smirk tugged at his lips. "Yes, I'll keep you updated. And trust me, Snoop's not letting this slide. He's invested in making this work." Daniel ended the call and set the phone down on the desk, exhaling deeply. He leaned back in the chair, his fingers steepled under his chin. The pressure from corporate was intense, but he knew he had the support of the man at the top. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he called. The door opened, and Emily stepped inside hesitantly. "Mr. Cross. Do you have a minute?" Daniel nodded, gesturing for her to take a seat. "What's on your mind?" Emily sat down, clutching her notebook tightly. "I just wanted to say, I think what you're doing here is important, and I want to help however I can." Daniel studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You've been here a while, haven't you?" Emily nodded. 3 years. "And in that time, have you ever seen anything like this?" Emily hesitated before shaking her head. "No, it's different, but in a good way." Daniel leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Then help me make it work. Lead by example. Show the others what this place can be." Emily straightened in her chair, a sense of pride filling her chest. "I will, thank you." Daniel nodded once, dismissing her with a wave. As she left the office, he leaned back in his chair, a faint smile playing on his lips. Out on the restaurant floor, the staff was busy preparing for the lunch rush. Emily had taken Daniel's words to heart and moved through her tasks with renewed determination. She checked on the table settings, ensuring every glass was spotless and every piece of silverware was perfectly aligned. When Carlos passed by with a tray of freshly polished plates, she offered him a reassuring nod. "Looking good, Carlos," she said, giving him a quick thumbs up. Carlos smiled faintly, the tension in his shoulders easing just a bit. "Thanks," trying to stay ahead of it. Across the room, Tyler was setting up in the kitchen, barking instructions to the junior cooks. "Come on, people, let's pick up the pace," he called, flipping a pan expertly over the flame. "I want everything prepped and ready before the first ticket hits the line." One of the newer cooks, Megan, glanced at him nervously. "Tyler, is it true that Snoop's coming in again today?" Tyler shrugged, keeping his focus on the pan in front of him. "Wouldn't surprise me. You heard what he said. He's watching. Best thing we can do is act like he's here every day." Megan nodded quickly, returning her attention to the chopping board in front of her. Tyler glanced over and noticed her uneven cuts. "Hey Megan, slow down," he said, his tone softening slightly. "Take your time. It's about precision, not speed." Megan nodded again, adjusting her technique. Tyler gave her an encouraging pat on the shoulder before returning to his station. Meanwhile, outside the restaurant, the media presence had grown even larger. Reporters crowded the sidewalk, microphones in hand, as they speculated on whether Snoop Dogg would make another appearance. Passers-by stopped to watch the scene, some pulling out their phones to snap pictures or record videos. One reporter, a young woman with a sharp blazer and a confident smile, addressed the camera. "We're live outside Snoop Dogg's restaurant, where tensions remain high after the viral video of the rapper's confrontation with his staff. Sources suggest he may return today to oversee the implementation of new policies aimed at improving customer service and professionalism. Stay tuned as this story develops." Behind her, a few fans held up signs that read, "We love you, Snoop," and "Respect the boss." The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Back inside, Daniel Cross stood by the front window, watching the commotion outside. He crossed his arms, his expression unreadable as he turned to Victor's replacement, a new assistant manager named Martin. "What do you think?" Daniel asked, nodding toward the crowd. Martin, a young and eager man in a neatly pressed suit, adjusted his tie nervously. "I think it's intense," he admitted. "But it's good publicity, right?" Daniel gave him a sharp look. "Publicity doesn't matter if we can't deliver. What happens inside this restaurant has to match the image we're putting out there. Otherwise, it's just noise." Martin nodded quickly. "Understood, sir. I'll make sure the team stays on point." Daniel's gaze softened slightly. "Good. This is your chance to prove yourself, Martin. Don't waste it." Martin straightened, his confidence bolstered by Daniel's words. "I won't, sir." The door to the restaurant swung open, and the familiar chime echoed through the room. The staff froze for a moment, their eyes darting toward the entrance, but it wasn't Snoop. Instead, a well-dressed man in his early 30s stepped in, his sharp suit and confident demeanor immediately drawing attention. Emily approached him with a warm smile. "Good afternoon. Welcome to—" The man held up a hand, cutting her off. "I'm not here to dine," he said, his tone curt. He pulled out a business card and handed it to her. "I'm Eric Daniels from the legal team. I need to speak with Mr. Cross immediately." Emily's smile faltered, but she nodded quickly. "Of course. Right this way." She led Eric to Daniel's office, knocking softly before pushing the door open. "Mr. Cross, there's someone here to see you." Daniel looked up from his desk, his eyes narrowing as he saw Eric. "Eric, didn't expect to see you so soon." Eric stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "We need to talk. It's about the media fallout." Inside Daniel's office, Eric Daniels sat across from him, his expression serious. He placed a slim folder on the desk, sliding it toward Daniel. "This is everything we've been monitoring online," Eric began, his tone crisp. "Comments, reactions, media coverage. It's a lot." Daniel flipped open the folder, scanning the printouts of social media posts, headlines, and online discussions. Some were supportive, praising Snoop Dogg's actions, while others criticized the situation, accusing the restaurant of poor management. "What's the general sentiment?" Daniel asked, his tone calm but firm. Eric sighed. "Mixed, but leaning positive for Snoop. People respect him for addressing the issue head-on. The public likes the narrative of him stepping in to fix the problem." He paused, his brow furrowing. But the staff, they're getting hammered. Jessica and Victor in particular are being dragged online. People are calling for boycotts unless major changes are made. Daniel leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. And corporate? Eric hesitated. They're nervous. They're glad Snoop took a stand, but they don't want this kind of attention long term. They're expecting results, quickly. They've given you full authority to handle this, but they're watching closely. Daniel nodded slowly, his mind working through the implications. Good, let them watch. This place is going to turn around one way or another. Eric shifted in his seat, lowering his voice. There's one more thing. Jessica's been receiving threats. Some of them are serious. Daniel's expression darkened. Have you contacted security? Eric nodded. Yes, but I wanted you to be aware. This situation has escalated beyond just the restaurant. It's personal now. Daniel's jaw tightened. Understood. Make sure she's protected, and keep me updated on anything new. Eric stood, smoothing out his suit jacket. Will do. Just keep in mind the public's patience won't last forever. They want to see real changes, and they want to see them now. As Eric left the office, Daniel's focus shifted back to the folder in front of him. He flipped through the pages again, taking in the sheer volume of public attention. The stakes were higher than ever, and he knew there was no room for mistakes. He stepped out of his office, his sharp gaze sweeping the restaurant floor. The staff was moving with precision, their actions careful and deliberate. It was a start, but Daniel knew it wasn't enough. At the front counter, Emily was helping a customer when she noticed Daniel approaching. He stopped beside her, his expression as serious as ever. Emily, he said, his tone direct. I need you to gather the team. 5 minutes. Kitchen and floor staff, everyone. Emily nodded quickly, her professionalism kicking in. Right away, Mr. Cross. She moved through the restaurant, notifying each staff member. In less than 5 minutes, the entire team was gathered near the back of the dining room, their expressions ranging from curious to nervous. Daniel stood before them, his posture commanding. He let the silence hang for a moment before speaking. We're at a turning point, he began, his voice steady but intense. What happened here over the past few days wasn't just a wake-up call for this restaurant. It's a wake-up call for all of us. The staff exchanged uneasy glances, but stayed silent. The world is watching us, Daniel continued. Every move we make, every plate we serve, every interaction we have, it's all under scrutiny. This isn't just about fixing a reputation. It's about building something better, something lasting. He paused, his eyes scanning the group. That starts with accountability. If you're here, it means you're ready to step up. But if you're not, if you think this is just going to blow over, you're in the wrong place. Tyler shifted slightly, his arms crossed, but his expression was resolute. Carlos stood a little straighter, his jaw set. Daniel nodded, as if satisfied with the reactions. Starting today, we're not just employees. We're a team. And as a team, we rise or fall together. Understood? Yes, sir, the staff echoed, their voices more confident than before. Daniel's gaze softened just slightly. Good, let's get back to work.